Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for braving the tropical storm, New York City subways, Uber to join us this morning for our 18th talk of Galerie Lelong Dialogues, with a marvelous conversation with artist Tariku Shiferaw and curator and amazing person, Larry Ossei-Mensah. So today's conversation is on the occasion of Tariku's exhibition, Marking Oneself in Dark Places, and it stays on view until the 21st of October. So I'm honored to introduce both of them and to briefly share a bit of their bios. And for more information, of course, you can check our website. So Tariku is known for his practice of mark making, and that explores the metaphysical ideas of painting as well as societal structures. The language of geometric abstraction is executed through densely layered materials, as you can see in the fabric and the paintings around me. And these gestures interrogate space and reference a hierarchy of systems. Tariku was born in Ethiopia. He grew up in Los Angeles, and now he lives and works in New York City. He finds inspiration in diverse cultures, especially in languages and music. In addition to this exhibition, he has a solo show at the Southampton African American Museum on Long Island, and that's on view through mid-November. Larry Ossei-Mensah, who, if you don't know him, he is one of our most amazing cultural producers, I think, of his generation. But he is a curator and cultural critic, and he uses contemporary art and culture as a forum to redefine how we see ourselves and the world. He has organized exhibitions, conversations, and programs with both commercial and nonprofit spaces around the globe, and truly around the globe. I know Larry was in London yesterday, with artists such as Firali Baez, Steve McQueen, Catherine Opie, Nick Cave, Cheryl Pope, Guadalupe Maravilla, Judy Chicago, Zez Palito, just to name a very few. He's a native of the Bronx, and he co-founded Art Noir, which is a nonprofit whose mission to drive racial equity in the arts. He currently has The Speed of Grace, a solo show, the Speed of Grace is the group show in São Paulo at Simões de Assis Gallery, and this fall presenting a solo show of Amoko Boafo, Soul of Black Folks at the Denver Art Museum. So at the end of the talk, we'll have some questions and answers from the speakers, and please join me in welcoming our two speakers.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Tariku, for the invitation to be in conversation. Thank you to the gallery. Thank you all for braving the weather, because I know you could have just as easily rolled over, pulled the covers on, and went back to sleep. So we're going to have a chat. You know, we're going to keep it casual. I was telling Tariku yesterday, I mean, honestly, you guys are getting an insight to a conversation that we've been having for several years about the practice, about the work, the ideas he's exploring. But before we get into the conversation, I just wanted to read an excerpt from a text that was shared with me. The text is A Sign in Space, because I feel like as I was reading about it, that's what Tariku is partially trying to get to in these works, in these paintings, in these installations that he's making. So I drew a sign at a point in space just so I could find it again 200 million years later. When we went by the next time around, what sort of sign? It's hard to explain, because if I say a sign to you, you immediately think of something that can be distinguished from something else. But nothing can be distinguished from anything there. You immediately think of a sign made with some implement or with your hands, or then when you take the implement or your hands away, the sign remains. But in those days, there were no implements or even hands or teeth or noses, all things that came along afterwards, a long time afterwards. I couldn't say I'll make the same or I'll make it different. There were no things to copy. Nobody knew what a line was, straight or curved, or even a dot or protuberance or a cavity. I conceived the idea of making a sign that's true enough, or rather I conceived the idea of considering a sign of something that I felt like making. So when at the point in space, not in any other, I made something of meaning. I made something to make a sign. It turned out that I really had made a sign after all. I know it seems like complicated, but in our conversations, thinking about what he's trying to achieve through the practice, and for me, thinking about these paintings as a sign, you know, as Mary mentioned, mark making as an essential component to the practice. And I just found it really poetic, so I just wanted to share that before we jumped into the conversation. So, Tariku, I don't want to assume everybody knows your work in depth. I want to believe they have an idea, but I always like to start with roots, right? So you were born in Ethiopia, grew up in LA. Can you talk a little bit about how that upbringing shaped you as a person, shaped your practice, shaped your interest in art?
Yeah, thank you for reading that text. I'm sure we'll get into it later. Yeah. So I was born in Ethiopia, grew up in Los Angeles, and I moved out here for grad school. And I think I found a lot of things to shape my mind, like the way I think, without realizing it, like subconsciously, you know. Whether, you know, coming from Ethiopia, understanding, you know, like what that feels like on the other side, and then growing up like here, like in the US and in Los Angeles, or even moving to New York, encountering like such a massive foot traffic in your everyday life. From, you know, from LA, like graffitis, to understanding how, you know, just the neighborhoods that I grew up in, from like the beach side to all the way down to like mid-city, to New York. It just, you know, like visual language has always been like something that gets stored into your subconscious, and you don't realize it. And so in that way, I think it has not only like visually, but like it has also culturally and conceptually affected me in ways that I did not understand, and I'm still like unraveling, you know, over like my lifetime. So it's hard to pinpoint every single moment, but there's been moments, you know.
But as you've worked through the practice, because you work, you know, you're thinking about color, you're thinking about sound, fabric with these polished chiffon works, sculpture, gesture, the grid, architecture. I know you can't pinpoint one thing, but are there threads, I guess, that you see come together when you think about Ethiopia, LA, and now New York, which is kind of like a more gridded structure? The architecture is definitely influential in how we move and think about space and ourselves.
100%. So for me, even like architecture began not just with buildings and freeways, and also LA, you know, like these like just cement-looking freeways where you know like black and white residues of, you know, like these murals that had been washed out from the 80s, and now you don't see them anymore. But like growing up as a kid in the 90s, so it's just like these, you know, like residues of that, and then all of a sudden like graffitis everywhere, like my neighborhood, the schools I went to, like tags and all that, and chain link fence, you know. Those were also like very interesting. And then I've talked about this extensively about these, you know, asphalt markings, sidewalk markings of like, you know, Verizon Co. or like, you know, the phone company, this, you know, like how to engage like the diggings and the storage and all that, and like that becoming like the architect of like the invisible architecture of like New York. Like when I came here, it's just like everywhere I go, I cannot escape like seeing these half arrows, or, you know, these like obscured like numbers that don't have any meanings to me, but like that had like these meanings. And then also encountering like the grid of like New York. Just the city, like Manhattan, like, you know, I went to school in the city here, so it was just like being able to get from anywhere to anywhere just easily, like being able to, like it's hard to get lost in Manhattan. Like everything is just gridded out and numbered out, like it's as easy as it comes. And so understanding that the grid in that way, but also like looking at like these chain link fences that were in my schools growing up, like to keep you in or to keep you out, you know, and the correlation between those two patterns has been an interesting moment. just coming up. And then materiality-wise, you asked, like the poly chiffons, and even like in the canvas, there's plastic in there. And those are materials that I just, I've been around for a very long time without realizing it, and also have collected for many years, like 8-9 years, And so it's interesting to make it make sense in my work over the years.
And within your practice, you utilize, for the sake of this conversation, a strategy of abstraction as a vehicle to talk about social issues, social structure, politics, mythology, folklore, but then also experimentation. Can you talk about how or why you found this approach effective for you to express yourself and articulate your ideas?
Abstraction has always been an interesting moment for me. I started with figuration, right? And so, but thinking of abstraction from afar, like growing up as a kid also, it has always been this thing that has viscerally like connected with me, right? Like these gestures, even as I painted like figuration, like as a kid, I've always appreciated those moments that were not very like well defined, but it was that moment like for an artist where you engage a moment of just making a mark, But interestingly for me, it was, I guess, the Russian constructivists that were making these abstract works, and they were like engaging politics in a way that they were not allowed to. And they either lost their lives or they got imprisoned, like for making those works, because they were told to make, classical works, figurations, because these abstractions were causing the people to sort of like rebel against the government. And I thought that was like a very interesting moment in history, in art history, to think about how an art movement could make people think critically and beyond, just the given, and so the given like society and societal structures. And so when I thought about abstraction, especially when I started like one of these Black Boys, which is the series with the bars, you'll see behind you, I was thinking about, engaging a place in art making that could also be like both physically and materially like very interesting, and engaging it in a way where there's like a lot of space to think around it, not to sort of just gridlock it into like one place or one thing or one idea, but also to expand upon just not only art making, but these political structures and societal structures, to think about other things beyond the art, the material, and that's how I was able to approach abstraction, and that's how I was able to use it. Even like being able to bring in other concepts, like, the titles are very powerful in my work in a way that engages art outside of art, or what is it? Cultural, like producing knowledge production outside of art.
But speaking on the titles, because if you look at the titles for many of the works, a lot of times you're referencing songs from the diaspora, like "Quiet is Kept" by Max Roach, or "No Agreement" by Fela Kuti, and so you talk about this this cross-pollination of artistic production. But what is it about music, or sound? Because you have an installation here in the gallery where you created this soundscape that you want people to kind of engage with as they experience the work. What is it about music and sound that functions as this complementary device that allows you, I guess, creatively to expand the reach and in terms of the ideas you want to articulate?
I think it's just the way I personally relate to music has always been a way that I engaged life. The way I came up, the way I grew up. I grew up listening to, all sorts of music, including hip hop, R&B, jazz, blues, reggae, Afro beats, and other music, Ethiopian music, and as well as, like other African music growing up, like from different parts of, Africa. And so, but for me, I think it all started with like the 90s, like gangster hip hop, like in a way that my mother never loved it. She did not want me to listen to it. And
But what was it
but
about?
it was just like, I think for her it's not even the lyrics. It was more like the beats. Like it was just like if you listen to it, you gotta listen to it loud, you know. And so I remember we had like this boombox in the house, and we would, you know, like I guess a modern boombox. You put the CD player in, and you know, just play that thing loud. And the only way to compromise or just amalgamate like between the two of us is like for me to just muffle that sound into like my body and just feel the beats. And there's something visceral about like listening to the music that I listened to. And also like later on I started playing the drum. I played the drums for many years. And so then music has been like a part of my life in a way that I identified with it. And when it came to art, art has been something that was taught in the schools that I went to, something very structural, something, even though it was not structural for me, but like whenever you took a class, it was like, there was a structure that it followed and a history that it followed, and none of that history included the things that I was interested in, maybe parts of it, but not all of it. And so like there was this materiality, this painting, these structures, this color theory, everything, like great, that's amazing. But even at some point, I think abstraction had, the mid-20th century abstraction had delved into like jazz music, the improvisational moments in jazz, but it just like touches on it and then it moves on to the next, you know, movement, right, of the 1960s. And so for me, when I started titling the works, the series One of These Black Boys, based on music by the African diaspora, I realized I was connecting my two worlds, the world that I come from and the art world that I am starting to understand systemically, structurally, and placing those two worlds together, I felt like there was a little bit of me in there. So the titles had to be that. The titles had to refer to something else that was producing knowledge outside of like these materials. And when I say knowledge, I'm talking about cultural production systems. Like these lyrics, these beats, all come from a culture that I understand and I come from, but also knowledge production system where, you know, we're from like these, what is it, the right word? Is it woke lyrics? No.
Vocal lyrics?
No. What's his name? Nas speaking.
Oh, Nas.
Conscious rap,
conscious
right?
rap.
Yeah.
Talib
So
Kweli.
it's Talib Kweli, Mos Def. You know, all these cats were like, you know, going into places that were very inspiring, you know? And I'm like, whoa, like I have to bring that into my own work. And in that way there was a mark, but also to hit on, you know, like the installation, the sounds, I feel like, because my work deals with, you know, space making and marking a, you know, a place, a space and whatnot, I feel like space is also occupied through not just the physicality, the physical things, but also through these sounds that are like not tangible with your hands, but like it takes up like an atmosphere. And so I needed that to be a part of the work as my work evolved into where it's going, you know, as I discover it.
And can you talk more about how you think about space making? Because I know you also talk about visibility, who has access to culture, who has access to art, information. Can you talk a little bit more about how that shapes how you think about the practice and the work that you're making?
Absolutely. I think making a space, for me, I just went conceptual with it. Like, I wanted to think about, first I wanted to think about my work as a way of making a mark, just in line with conversations from mid-20th century paintings. That's like where One of These Black Boys series like originated from, right? Like the ideas of mark making comes from making a mark, marking the surface of a canvas, of a painting, and then growing from there, you know, going from there. And so then for me, I was just asking, like, how does someone that looks like me be able to make a mark in society, let alone in art history, where, you know, I had not seen a lot of my reflections in that history. And so then I started titling the works based on something that is not included in there. And that was, you know, like all these like song lyrics or song titles. But the moment these works sort of just hang on these walls, whether it's gallery walls, institutional walls, they're marking a place, a space, in a way that refers back to another, you know, knowledge production systems. And in that way, it allows a conversation around these moments. And that conversation in itself is also space making, right? It makes space for others to expand upon that conversation and bring in other conversations that may relate to them.
And so you keep referring to one of these black boys, so you have examples from that series behind you guys if you just want to take a look behind you, because, you know, why have slides when you got the artwork? But can you talk a little bit about, from a process standpoint, this series, it's evolved over time. You know, I remember when you did like a series of ones that had like a white ground with the black bars or a blue ground with the black bars. You have some where you use charcoal to kind of make these improvisational marks on paper. And then you have now this polychiffon material. So can you talk about, like, I guess this is where you can nerd out, technically how you got here? Because I think one thing that's important to point out is that with these paintings in particular, they're layers of fabric, and there's actually not that much paint, right? So it's this illusion of paint, which I think was like really interesting in terms of seeing how this series evolved. So I guess
making paintings without painting,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I think, you know, just conceptually, I was like, oh, okay. You know, because knowing this series, there were gestures that are consistent that I was familiar with. And for you to say, yeah, that's not paint. That's me layering and experimenting to kind of give you the essence of paint. But I think it also builds on your point in terms of like, how do you create an object that is, I guess for lack of a better phrase, in opposition to a Western idea of what a painting could be?
Yeah. As you've mentioned it, just for contextual purposes, this series has gone through so many different like forms. From it started with these like Home Depot 3.5 millimeter thick plastic, clear plastic, black plastic, with acrylics, with spray paint, with vinyl, with iridescent film, with mylar, you name it. Like, it's gone through like so many different forms. I started this series back in 2016, and for about 8 or 9 years, I've been collecting different fabric materials from regular, like cotton to nylon to silk, a variety of silk, to patterned silk, to plain silk, and to polychiffon. In 2019, I came across these polychiffons that have crinkles in them in the fashion district, and I started just setting them aside. It's not until 2020 that I had leaned into like making these works. I started just messing around. I mean, I felt like the world is over. I don't know if our art careers were going to continue after that. So I was just like, let me do this. And I would go to the studio. It was a time when, during the pandemic where the trains were not operating. So if you didn't have a bike, you're walking. I didn't have a bike the first month, so I was walking about an hour and 20 minutes to the studio from my apartment each way. And
this is the studio downtown?
In the South Bronx. In the very beginning, and so I would show up. I'll probably spend like 5 to 6 hours a day, and then come back before the sun went down, kind of. And so in that time, I knew that I was just making works for myself. I don't know if anyone would ever see them. So I started these works in 2020, and I think there's one from each year: 2020, 21, 22, 23. And so I started making works in and like at the end of the year, every year, to make these, to engage these, and they changed as they went. But these works have been just a product of like my time alone, and I had not shown them to a lot of people. I've shown them to a handful of artists just over a studio visit to hang out. So there've been just layers of like different like fabric materials, you know, from, and in some cases there's a little bit of paint, you know, a little bit of blue in there. But speaking of color, you know, the entire series started with black and blue, right? Where black and blue has been a very significant part of the series, where it had meant so many things, from like aesthetic beauty for myself, like what I found very attractive, but also like political and poetic gestures within like the relationship between black and blue, where black and blue is like the night sky, the black night sky, the blue day sky for me. Black and blue was the bruising of the black skin. Black and blue is this gesture that, you know, references so many different things, including, you know, the black body and the blue uniform that enforces the system on that body, right? And so there's all of that took place within this body of work. And so when I expand into these different materials, it has been not moving away from that, but it also holds that, you know? And so then with these black chiffons, what I loved about them is that they almost acted like your, you know, like your phone. You have this protector screen on your phone where you can, you know, the next person can't see it. So these works, in a way, I was interested in like the layering and the revealing of like the materials under, the gestures under. So like if you were to look at it from an angle, you can't really see it, but you would have to like face the work for the work to sort of reveal itself to you. But that also relates to some of the works that I make in the other in this ongoing series, Mata Semay, which the layering takes place, right? Like there's the layering of like lighter colors from underneath, and then you work your way out into these darker colors, and just the classical paintings of the last 500 years, techniques from Rembrandt to, and you can name many more artists going forward, right? Like a way of like creating this illuminated like depth and gestures, and so that's how I.
So this series, which means night sky, thinking a lot more about myth, folklore. Can you talk about the gestation period of this body of work? Because I recall seeing Loverboy, Billy Ocean, your first show here. It's a love thing, it's a joy thing. And I was like, oh, wow, this is, you know, a left turn.
Yeah.
And you were like, it's actually part of a larger body of work. So how did you begin to develop this series? And then also then it became, you know, exploded, because you did the group show at Smack Melon. And you made A Strange Place to Cast Our Dreams.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And that piece was 24 feet tall, 8 feet wide. It was the biggest work.
56 feet wide.
Oh, 50, oh, I got it wrong. Okay, sorry. 24 feet by 56.
Yes.
Okay, it was big as hell. And I was impressed to see, you know, this seed of an idea then explode, and then now you're digging deeper, you know, with some of the work being presented in the exhibition. Can you talk a little bit about the gestation period of this and why it took so long for you to kind of go full force in terms of sharing it with the public? Because I know there was a lot of research involved, and then also just kind of experimentation in the studio to get it right to a point where you felt satisfied.
A lot of works have been destroyed in the making of this. Yes, I think having the series, One of These Black Boys, in the forefront, like being able to share that publicly, has allowed me time to perfect this body of work. So it has afforded me time to like research, to just, you know, like make works and figure out like what's working, what's not. But I think, like even like thinking about this series, first of all, speaking of layering, I think one thing I failed to mention was that besides Rembrandt, there was also like Wagenshi Mutu's layering that she does when you see it from afar is this beautiful thing, right? And then you get up close, is this like gruesome like imageries, and that that immediately engage the idea of like the beauty of colonialism from afar, and then when you get into it, it's like this horrendous like evil thing. And so I love that thing about like the looking great from looking interesting from afar, and then when you get in, you can see more details and layers, right? But coming into this body of work in the gestation period, I was also thinking about my experiences from even exhibitions that I had seen, like the Chris O'Feely's mid-career survey at the New Museum, I think, Night and Day, yeah, in 2014. And I was just thinking how like there's this like 3 or 4 floors of works, and then on the 3rd floor, you would encounter these paintings. They're referred to as the night paintings of Chris O'Feely. And it's interesting, even though they're like figurations, you go in there, it's hard like not to be fascinated by them. There's these like, I think, I forget this, but maybe they used like ultraviolet light to go through, to walk through the show. You had someone walk you through, and you engage it in a way that is like very experiential, like in a way that you're immersed in it, and it's like completely dark. And then you can't wait until you get out there, and then once you get out, you're like, you want to come back in to see it again, because it was this magical moment.
Yeah, it was also very meditative.
Very meditative,
because you
right?
really had to sit, and like your eyes had to adjust to what you were seeing in order to really read the paintings, which I thought was like a really poetic move, because normally when you go to a museum show, you go, you see the art, now you take the picture, maybe take a picture with the art, and this kind of like removed.
And it's hard because it's a dark space. You can't really take a picture of, no selfies in there. Like you can't, like it's just so dark. And so then, but looking at those works and thinking about like, how do I, engage the night sky has also been like a very interesting place for me, a place conceptually and physically, and culturally. The night sky has been a place of cultural references. And so to think about capturing that night sky into a painting or an installation is also like, I've seen a lot of people do it justice, but a lot like more that haven't. And I'm like, how do I engage also like my practice of painting and creating such works? And it really came down to like, what's the point of painting the night sky if it did not engage all these concepts that I'm interested in? And for me, it was more about like the mythologies that we see in films, read in books. Historically, from the Western perspective, it's always been like these Greek mythologies, these Roman mythologies, how like you engage the night sky as these constellations are all named in a way that does not include some of the things that I understand and identify with. And so then I went in depth about like figuring out like what the Dogons was like. And the Dogon people, I'm sure a lot of you might have heard of them, but they're a group of people that have existed for so long and have studied the night sky for over 5,000 years, which is more than any group of people have ever studied the night sky. They've found things that we are just finding with modern technology in like the 1900s, the 20th century, like the dimmest star in the night sky and the brightest star in the night sky. All that was discovered. We don't know how they did that, or what kind of technology they might have had, but it's been a very interesting find, right?
So fun fact, Sirius
A and B.
So most people may or may not know that actually was the inspiration for Parliament Funkadelic's Atomic Dog.
Oh, word.
Responding to that constellation and the myth or spirituality, but then also what you've talked about, this knowledge production
Right.
I think a lot of times is erased from history.
And so to place that, so for me, Mata Semay, I titled it Mata Semay because in Amharic, Mata Semay means night sky in Amharic, which is the language I was raised in. And then to think about how, to imagine a night sky that is not really, it does not exist. It's something that I imagine. It's something I'm painting. When you walk into the installations, it's not an exact depiction of the night sky that we see, but it's something, an abstracted gesture of what, the night sky could be. And so then even when you hear, different components, including sound, become part of the constellations, the ideas. And even coming back to the reading you did in the beginning, A Sign in Space is the title for the piece, for the installation piece with sound and ceramic sculptures in there. A Sign in Space was written by Italo Calvino, an Italian writer who is very interesting in the way he writes. And the excerpt that Larry read was just the beginning part of that particular writing from the series Cosmocomics. And in that, he reads about this primordial being who makes this mark in space, literally in space, and thinks to himself, I'm gonna go around the universe real quick. It'll take me about 200 million years, one galactic year in his words, and it ends up taking him 3 galactic years, which is 600 million years. And when he comes back, the sign, he no longer recognizes the sign that he had made. And he no longer, he thinks that someone has tweaked it, someone had made a mark on it, or it has somehow morphed and changed into a thing that he no longer recognizes to a point where he doesn't believe that that's his sign anymore. And so the whole story is just the moral of the story is the futility of making a mark in the sky or in space, and expecting it to last, right? To imagine if there's, we're looking at Jupiter, Saturn from here, right? And we're looking at the Orion's belt from here, different constellations. And what if somebody else is looking at it differently from a different part of the world or a different planet, right? Where making a sign and saying, hey, look, we own this, gritting it out, right? To sort of just conquer these places, these names, these cultures.
So is that a framework you think about when you're making your work, taking into consideration that people will read it differently, they'll engage with it differently, and trying to create these immersive experiences so that people, they can bring their own experience to it, but that is not, I guess, misread to a degree?
As an artist, I think, we try to make works that that could somehow get you in the ballpark of understanding the concepts of the work, but no one can, whether a writer, an artist, a scientist, no one could get you to read their work exactly the same way they were thinking about it. And I think that would be, that would be interesting that would be tough, right? So, and that's what I love about abstraction also. You leave it open, and people enter those works with their own experiences. Especially with one of these Black Boy series, people enter those and through their own experiences. Some through mid-20th century abstraction, others through the titles of the lyrics, others through the materiality, and others through just not knowing art, trying to understand art. And I think it's the same way with these paintings and installations. So,
without giving away the secret sauce, because I know there's some artists in the room, can you talk a little bit about the process of making these works? Do you have a particular idea in mind? Do you just start with a base color, because I love with this one, just kind of have this yellow gesture on top, but then there's purple, there's so many different colors kind of speaking to you at one time. So without giving away the secret sauce?
Yeah. So, with these works, I use brighter colors to sort of layer. I would start with, it's usually 3 colors from purple, blue, and yellow. And whenever those colors sort of overlay, there's this a third color or a fourth color that gets created. You know, like when the blues and the yellows come together, there's this green that comes up, and then when the yellows and the purples come together, depending on which one is on top, there's this bronze, brownish, like almost like orangish color, like that comes up, and then when the purple and the blue sort of come together, there's like a deeper, like violent blue or whatnot, and then like once that is done, then I do the, you know, any gestures you might see, any marks you might see, any drawings you might see happens on top of that, and then after that I do a Payne's gray, sort of like watered down with acrylic matte medium, and, you know, place it on there. Sometimes one layer is enough, but most times I would go over it with one layer, let it dry, and between each layers there's like a 24-hour period where it's like it dries and cures. And so then by the time I get to the last layer, it's usually, you know, if it's a small piece, it's a week, you know. And with the larger pieces, it takes much longer.
And how, because you said there were a bunch that you made that didn't work.
Oh, yeah.
So when did it start working? How did you get, what's the point of satisfaction where you're like, all right, I got it?
So I got it the first time I tried it in probably like 2016. And it worked, but I sort of just put it away for like a couple of years, and by the time I got back to it, 2015, 16, by the time I got back to it and got into this body of work, I finally got one piece right, and that was Loverboy that you mentioned earlier, and it was hanging right there. It was a 10-foot painting with 10 by 8-foot painting, and it was like an amalgamation of the two series. There's the night sky, and then there's one of these black boys, like bars, right? And it was titled Loverboy after Billy Ocean's song in the 1980s. And in that moment, like, I knew I just had something magical. But after that piece, I had like 10 large paintings that I tried, and they all failed.
Oh, wow.
Miserably failed.
What didn't work?
It didn't work. It was just like, it was so constricted. There was this thing about it that was not right for me. Like visually, there was no movement in the same way that there was movements in these paintings you see, and there was no depth in the way that, you know, sometimes it will be like oversaturation of like these dots you see, and sometimes it will be like oversaturation of like the colors, or maybe sometimes they're too dark. Something happens, and I destroyed some of them, I kept some of them, and I just kept on making new ones. And finally,
what kept you motivated to keep going? Because I know that, and we talk about this with a lot of artists, you know, growing in their practice, there's sometimes a desire to just leave it and move on to the next thing.
I mean, I left some of them for a while, you know. You live with it. I think art is, one, it's a lifestyle. You live with the work, you see it. Sometimes a studio session is not necessarily making works. A studio session is also living with the works that you've made. I think what makes an artist is you make one painting that's really good, potentially by accident, and then learning what went right and how to repeat that, and being able to repeat that multiple times makes you the artist that you want to be, and I think that's physically and conceptually speaking, that's what I refer to success in my mind. And so studio sessions with sitting with these works that did not work is also part of like studio time, learning about the work.
So I want to quickly pivot while we have some time to assign in space the installation. You talked a little bit about music and its role in your life and the practice, but what's interesting about this is you created a soundscape that's an amalgamation of music from across the diaspora. So you have, you know, Zulu music, Nigerian music, Aboriginal music, some of it is distorted. Why, well, not even why. What was the process to get to this point where like you go from using music as a naming convention for some work to now it's incorporated in the experience that people have with the work?
again, it's to infuse and introduce like other aspects of my thought process, and even in titling the works, I was using those titles as a way to pivot or to lean into other people's productions, right? Other people's like labor that have, because you don't just make work by yourself. It's something that you build onto, like what humanity has created, what cultures have created. And so for me to lean into different cultures is a way of creating, for the installation works, the sounds themselves are these chantings, right? Chantings of these worship sounds of ancestral prayers. There's this war chants, Zulu war chants from South Africa. There's like Masai Mara chants. There's Cameroonian chants. There's Haitian tubes that are recorded in Central Park. A lot of the sounds I found, a lot of the sounds I recorded, I've been collecting these for over 5 years. And so what the sounds do is they act as a conceptual part of like the constellations in that series, in that installation. And so,
But
there's also...
But not to cut you off.
Sure.
Like, and it could be intuition, it could have been like systemic. How do you land on like these different things, right? Mm-hmm. And what was it that you were aiming to get at by bringing them together to create your own?
Yeah. I was messing around with it for a while, for many years. I think I presented this idea. I had a residency in Lower East Side at this program called LES Studio Program, and they give you like a very tiny, like maybe 10 by 10 studio with like a large window, and they just tell you to make whatever you want. And so they gave me a space for like 6 months in 2019, and that's where I literally started like messing around with like with these wooden boxes that I used to make, and these painted surfaces. So I would like use the entire all the walls, all 4 walls, which is not that big, and place like music from my iPhone, and just place it under the boxes and just try to like feel it out. And so like experimentation wise, it was interesting. There was something that was good about it, but there was something that's just like undone, right? Like not there yet. So that sort of like gave me a little bit of like power and encouragement to continue with that. But the more I looked into these sounds, the more, I went to different places to also record some of these sounds. I had this like deacon in Ethiopia just like go around town with me, find a book that referred back to the zodiac signs from an old ancient language that of Ethiopians and Eritreans called Giz, and I had him read. I had him read that book. I was like, yo, like, so for 6 hours we're out there reading, and I'm like recording him because I can't fully like read it. And so, and he was reading the names, and I think part of that is also like, I remember putting his reading into like that sound, a way of like referring to the zodiac signs that are not Western, that are not even like current Ethiopian. They're just like before that time, like in a language that is now only known by the priests, just much like the Dogon language, right? Mm-hmm. Only the priests know it. Has been extinct for 700 years. The Giz has been extinct for 1,000 years. So there's these cultures that I bring into it, but also going into like Haitian tubes is like this way of like connecting these diasporic relationships, right? Like these places where they come from, like whether it's West, South, or East Africa, and into like the Caribbeans. And the last sound I recorded was when I was in Brazil in Bahia, the Rivera, we were there together. And we were in the Rivera district, if you remember, in Avila's grandma's house. And right when we stepped out, there's these people playing capoeira, just for themselves, not performing, not nothing. It's just, the beach is right there. They're sitting on an elevated ground, and they're just doing this capoeira thing. And I'm like, I have to record. And Avila's like, I'll take you to a place where they do that. I'm like, no, but this is so natural. Like, I want this. And so, like, recorded a piece of it that is also part of the soundscape in there. As well as those 50 plus women drummers. I don't know if you remember that. But I wanted like this sound of an engine in these ceramic sculptures. I have 24 ceramic sculptures in there, and I wanted it to sound like an engine, like almost like these like terracotta warriors of the ancient Chinese emperor. And so then I wanted it to sound like an engine, so I we sped up the sound of the drums and overlaid it with some of the trucks that I had recorded going over metal railing, like the clack sound, you know? And to create that, so the first minute of that 12-minute loop, what you hear is this drums sounding like an engine, like vibrating inside of these ceramic structures. And even those ceramic structures, like they help magnify the sound, right? The sound sort of bounces off of the walls of these ceramic structures. And so that's like where the sound inspiration comes from, the idea of casting that sound into that space as a form of constellations that is alternative to the other constellations that we understand and have been, you know, like marked in a way that that is, you know, like very Western.
Last question before we open it to the audience. Now that the show's been up, you've had time to see it outside of the studio, meditate on the work. Where do you aspire to take, you know, either series or these series next in terms of concept? Or the things
I
you're
would
thinking
love
about?
to do larger installations, man. Okay. I would love to, you know, those ceramic sculptures that you see in there, I would love for them to fill up a room bigger than this and have sounds like pan from different parts of them and sort of create like the soundscape in a way that it just reverberates the room. Like you could feel, like I want people to feel that vibration that I felt when I was muffling those sounds away from my mother, you know, just so that I could feel it in my heart, like, you know, pound. And so like, I want those bass, the engine, you know, everything, the clack, you know, like I want that to be like more prevalent. And it would be really cool to do that in a space, in a larger space than that smaller room. And just have it like exist, you know, like to make it for the sake of making it.
Cool. Well, thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Yeah, battled the rain to be here, so there's got to be one or two questions. Over here, thank you. Oh. Okay.
I'm really curious about these kind of lines or striations that appear at the surface of the canvas, where you've almost kind of like disrupted the unity of the brushwork a little bit, like these kind of almost diagonal but not quite diagonal lines that fall across the canvas. I'm wondering how they function for you, and what you're sort of trying to articulate in that specific form of mark making.
So the question for those watching, the mark making on the surface of the canvas on this work or some of the works we see in general?
I think in all the works.
This work and that work too, and then that work.
Yeah, if you want to talk a little bit more about
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So with these works, I've always been interested in the layering of works, and there's many ways of seeing these layers, but I love how these cutting through the canvas or the surface with these lines, how it like directly goes right into the different layers. It reveals, it's like, it becomes like this window of like being able to see the surface underneath, like the layer, you know? And, but it also was inspired through these spiraled, like, these marks that I would make in my previous works where, you know, like it would be like these scribbles that I would do. And it sort of just, you know, like, it came from that. I used to scribble through like wet paint and then you could be able to see like the blue underneath. It will be like a black surface, and it will be like, and then you'll see the scribbles in blue, and it would usually be like the color, like underneath, the paint underneath the paint. And so I wanted to reveal that, and that is how these came about.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi. Thank you for doing this. This is great. In the installation, the ceramic pieces remind me of your palettes. And when I first saw a photo of it, that's what I thought it was. And then I read it was ceramic. Is there a relationship there? Is it supposed to just kind of bringing that marking and with what you've said in the past with palettes, and it represents so much, and even the journey. So when I walked into the room, well, when I saw the photo too, it brought all these possibilities of place, and I wanted to find out from you what you were trying to have the viewer experience, or what you were experiencing, and then what the ladder represents.
Okay, so is there a correlation with the ceramics and the palettes that you've used previously? What do you want people to experience, or what did you experience? What does the ladder mean?
Gotcha. Great question also. With the shipping palettes that you're referring to, yeah, those did inspire my previous body of works, like where you see the two-dimensional, like horizontal parallel bars. But then again, I started making the actual emulation of the shipping palettes in wood, and I think if you're referring to those works where I would like place them all over the walls, and you see them either like black wooden objects against these like blue painted backgrounds, or as in like the last exhibition behind on top of like these black objects on top of like the pink background. But in this particular case, actually in this particular case, I had made these first in wood, like in 2019. I'd never shown them, and that's where I tried the sounds underneath them. But they were, of course, they were much lighter, but there was something missing for this body of work, because I, like with Mata Semay, the night sky, I was entering into these like more like different materials, like, you know, like soil, ground, and relation to land and whatnot. And so I wanted to like move away from the wooden pieces into something that's a little bit more natural. And in doing that, I was able to empty out the center of the pieces so that you could place like speakers in there, and the sound could like be magnified. But yeah, like and then the ladder, good observation. In 2021, I had painted, another inspiration for this series is the Adinkra symbols. The Adinkra people come from like North Africa, migrated through Africa all the way south to like the West Africa, modern day Ghana, Benin, and Côte d'Ivoire. And they started making these symbols in the early 1800s. And now they have over 500 symbols. And one of them is this symbol that looked like a ladder, and it's referred to as the ladder of death, but it's not really like the ladder of death. It's in reference to understanding life and its vastness of life, and the way there's like a form of existence, right, beyond just this life, but like onto the next realm kind of a thing. And so in that moment, so I had painted this like clandestine like ladder within like this night sky. And it's been a moment that I've really enjoyed. And when I saw an opportunity to open up that door, which is, you know, the fire marshal would allow that, which was perfect. So I went in there and we painted that entire wall, and that ladder became a reference to that moment, you know, a ladder of death into the unknown.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
You got it.
One more question, if any?
So You talk about a great desire for a larger installation, and you sort of elaborated on the idea of immersion in the viewer. How important is scale now to that experience and your desire and your goal for this body of work? Like, I see some small works, but these are grand and large and beautiful. But I'd be curious as to how scale plays into your goals.
I'm my conceptual translator.
How does scale play into your goals? Which is a question I was going to ask before, so thank you for bringing that up, Eric, because, you know, if you guys saw the Smack Melon piece, I mean, imagine this wall behind you, and it's this one large painting from this series. And so it's been interesting to see the scale oscillate, but for the most part,
It's also
it's been like, it draws you in. So I guess, how
So-
are you thinking about scale?
Yeah, I think size is very much interesting to me. The Smack Melon piece is another 10 foot above this wall. So there's this vastness about it. Like when you think about the night sky, it's not something you contain, right? It's something you could like be immersed into as you either, you know, imagine it, see it. You can't walk into it, obviously, but in these installations you could. And so, but when I also bring it down in scale, it's also like bringing like a piece of that into a place where you could exist with, right? And so there's that relationship to engaging it in its vast ways. And it's not you can't really experience these like large, vast like works in your like private spaces, obviously. Even in institutions, it's barely doable. But in making these smaller works, I feel like that's a way, like the sign and the signifier, right? Like a reference from the big pieces to these pieces. This piece sort of just referring back to the big pieces, you know?
With that, thank you, Tariku. Thank you guys for being here.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. The conversation will be on our website. Thank you, John, for tech. Thank you, Grace, Eve, and the whole gallery staff. And mostly, thank you, Larry and Tariku, and our very wonderful audience who shared this event with us. So please have a drink, and you can ask Tariku some questions.
And one more thing, the show's up until October 21st. Yes. So if you want to come back, bring friends, take pictures, post on Instagram.
The sound is off right now, but I think we're going to turn it on, right? Yeah. So you could be able to experience the sound before you go, maybe, if you haven't seen the show before.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
You're
guys.
a great audience.
So.